Hello, everyone. Welcome back to book club. I know we took a little break last week, but not to fear. The reading is back. Still staying on it. So I'm super excited for this week because when I came across Kylie's book, it felt so prevalent, even though it was written a while ago, and to kind of come across a body of work that translates so well to the current times was really exciting for me. And I started to read it and I just thought, like, this is the perfect book to do with everything going on in the world right now. And I actually reached out to Kylie and she agreed to come on, and that's just, like, when I get to talk to an author about their book, I geek out totally, so I'm very excited to do this. And so we read Kylie Reed's book, Such a Fun Age. In advance, I'm sorry that I gave short notice. Next week, I promise I'll give more notice. But the second I started reading it, I finished it in a day because I was so invested into this story. But for those of you who haven't read it, you should definitely order it after this live because I really think the topics that it covers translate super well into what's going on in the world right now. So, it's a lot of uncomfortable but very important topics. And it's just interesting to look at how millennials navigate pre-existing concepts of race and just how the different generations kind of deal and handle and process those. Stuff like classism and microaggressions that we see happening every day around us, and just transactional relationships in general. So this book is about 25-year-old Amira Tucker, who babysits for a white family. And a brief kind of synopsis, she's stopped when she's out with the child at a grocery store at night and questioned as to why she's with this child, and kind of gets accused in really horrible ways. And it kind of deals with how she handles that, how the people around her handle that, and just concepts of race in general, stuff like that. So I just finished the book literally this morning, and I couldn't be more excited to bring Kylie on. So without further ado.
I think we're in.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm so good. How are you?
I'm great. I love that you just finished it. You're like freshly.
Oh, I'm so fresh on it, and I loved it so much. I can't even explain it to you. And just the fact that, I guess reading it now when it's so relevant was so crazy. Because when did you write the book?
There's always the year that you're thinking of writing the book, that nothing is really happening.
And the year it comes out.
Exactly. And then I wrote it from 2015, and I finished it in 2018. So about 3 years, 2015 to 18. But I have to say, when we submitted the book to be sold, that week was the week that in Philadelphia, where I live now, 2 Black men were trying just to go to Starbucks, and the police were called on them. And it's, as a person who loves realistic writing, it's wonderful to see that what you're writing is relevant, but as a human, it's also tragic. So yeah.
Yeah, you're like, I'm writing this hoping it's fantasy, and then it turns out to be the reality. It's definitely tough. And when did you decide you were going to become a writer?
Oh man, I've loved storytelling since I was little. I was always filling up notebooks, but I thought it was more of a hobby. And then I thought that I really wanted to be an actor, and so I went to college for theater, and I thought that was the thing. And then I shot a commercial, and I was like, this is it. My life is going to be different. And I hated it. It just wasn't for me. And I give so many props to people who have the patience for it. But I just felt like when I was at home in my room writing, that's when I felt like I was at my best self. And so I started taking writing classes, and a huge part of being a writer is having other jobs, like being a nanny, which I was, working at a coffee shop. Yeah, all of those things. I was a receptionist for a long time. And so, even though I decided I wanted to write when I was 23, I feel like it didn't kick in until I was around 30 or so. Yeah.
And was that around when this book came out? Was this kind of your debut novel?
This is the first good one, but there were many trash ones before this. But yeah, so
naturally, I feel like that kind of is the progression of especially writing. But
exactly. So I took about 100 pages of this to graduate school, and it was my thesis. And then I sold it in the first summer between my first and second year.
Oh wow. when you were in school? That's crazy. That's wild.
Yeah, so my second year, I didn't really pay attention too much because I was like, it's done, so I can just hang out a little bit.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
You're like, it doesn't matter, it's done. And then all of a sudden you're probably like editing and you're like, oh my goodness, what is happening? Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And what inspired you to write at such a fun age?
The biggest thing is I always start with characters and story. I'm pretty obsessed with the dynamic tension that happens when you have three people. I think three is a really magical number in storytelling. And from so many like movies that have such high art, like Moonlight is one of my favorite movies, to movies like My Best Friend's Wedding, which is another one of my favorite movies. I love the triangle. It's so good. It holds up. I watched it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that dynamic tension between three people is really important to me for storytelling. And so I knew that I wanted an awkward relationship between three people. And the story of, you know, a Black babysitter, a white mother, and a white child is kind of an old story. And I knew I wanted that. But then it got a little bit deeper into this young woman who feels like she's lost her new white boyfriend and her employer. And so I love bouncing in between.
And those dynamics were so good because you feel the tension, like you feel, and I love how you kind of bounce back from like Alexis's perspective, and then you have like, you know, Amira's, and so it was just a really good kind of like hearing everyone's thought process is really cool when you're dealing with two people.
Yeah, I think that when you have three, and especially when there's a child involved, when you have a toddler, she's very adorable, but she's like a worthless alliance because she's bouncing between Alex and Amira and who's her favorite at that time. And so I feel like that makes Amira's heart pull a little bit as well. And so I love awkward moments. I love that tug and pull, and I just really wanted to lean into those. And then once I had the body of work, I felt like it was a really great place to explore how classism works between all of characters as well.
100%. And the book, it begins in a high-end grocery store with this kind of like, I feel like the book starts with kind of like the biggest event, and then you unpack it from there. What kind of made you decide to start the book with an incident like the one at the grocery store?
So, you know, as a writer and a reader, I'm a little impatient, and I need something at the beginning to like be into it. And I, you know, whenever friends will recommend, do you ever have this when someone recommends a book to you and they're like, listen, the first 50 pages are a little boring, but then it gets really good? I'm just like, no.
Yeah, but I'm like, well, then I can't do it. I know. I'm so the same. I need to be captured very quickly.
I feel the same way. And like nowadays, like especially because there's so many books that I want to read, I give something 100 pages and then I'm like, okay, I'm out. I'm
moving on to the next one. Yeah.
Yes. Too many books to read. And so I knew I wanted something highly dramatic in the beginning, but I also love bringing all of the characters in at one time. And so I wanted this event. Also, like in the beginning, when I'm getting to know these characters, watching them react to something is a really great way of getting to know them. Like, let's just see how they react when they're in a high tension situation. And, you know, it's so funny. Like now I've had so many readers read it, and I love when people get invested, and so many women will say like, I wanted Mira to stand up for herself. I wanted her to do this, and I wanted her to do this. And that honestly made me want to make her even more awkward and like not a good communicator in that moment, because that's who she is.
And you also can't tell how anyone's going to react until you're in that exact situation. So I think that's like a genius way to start it off, is to, because that's when your true self comes out, because you don't even have time to think about acting like someone else.
Right. It's just like the tension, like, well, I'm the kind of person too, like I'll walk away from a moment like that and like I'll take a shower and like that's when I'll realize,
oh yeah, I'm like, I should have said that.
It always comes a little bit later.
Yeah. You come up with like the perfect comeback. Yeah. 3 hours later in the shower and you're like, oh, it's too late.
Yeah. You can't call them and tell them. And so I really wanted to lean into all that with Amira and have her, she's really smart and savvy, but she's not, like, she needs a minute before she delivers her thoughts. And I really want to honor that for her.
Absolutely. And I think it was a brilliant thing to make her not super reactive and get angry, because it's not the reality of a lot of people, you know, like we internalize it a lot when something like that happens. So I think that was like a very realistic way to portray it.
Good. I think we all do that. I think like Black women, especially in a workplace, disassociation is such a big part of being Black in a white place. And when someone says a joke or something that you are offended by, you have to think, you know, do I want to make this awkward for everyone in this room? I'm up for a promotion, or like, I think this guy in the room is cute. I don't want him to see me go off on this. There's so much like natural human stuff that you're going through. And so I didn't want it to just be this like totally satisfactory example. I just wanted her to be who she was in that moment.
Yeah. And even like, I feel like those are things that are implemented from childhood, especially in Black children, of like, you know, I don't know if you've read Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I did that for book club. And he's just saying his dad would tell him, like, you have to be better than, you have to even act better than everyone else to, like, overcompensate. And this idea of, like, having to be even more well-behaved than a white person is expected to is just, I feel like, something that is placed into these children's beliefs from, like, a very young age.
Or 100%. I mean, you have to be twice as good as I think
Mm-hmm.
something that most Black children are told in
Mm-hmm.
their lives. And it's sad as an adult to see now that, like, my parents weren't wrong for telling me that in a lot of situations. I've had every Black woman, I'm sure, has had so many instances from, you know, when I was at work, people saying to me, oh, you seem really aggressive, you're really scary. And I say, I'm so sorry, like, can you give me an example? And they don't have an example to come back to me. And so I think it's just like how people are used to seeing Black people, from, like, whether they see them on TV or not see them at all. And, you know, it's those little moments that you have to say, do I want to say something or disassociate a little bit? And a lot of the times I pick disassociate because I'm just trying to have a good day, you know? And so, yeah.
Well, I also think, like, there are moments when you just know they'll never understand your perspective. And it's also not your job to educate people on how to act correctly. And I think that's where, like, the communication gets lost, is a lot of people don't want to accept their privilege. So if someone were to say something back to them, they would take offense to it, which I think is, like, completely the wrong mindset to have, because it completely prohibits growth.
Totally. That's such a hard part too, especially lately. It's been so interesting. I've talked to a lot of Black authors about this, and that, you know, it's wonderful that people want to submerge themselves in Black art. That is the best. At the same time, I feel that a lot of people put the term educator on Black authors as well. And it's like, I'm a storyteller. I am not here.
Yeah, it's not your job. Yeah.
No, and, like, I am telling one Black girl story. I'm not telling everyone's story. Like, I would have reacted differently. People would have reacted to me differently because I have light skin, colorism exists. There's all of those things. And, you know, when I was on book tour, I did have white women come up to me sometimes and say, just tell me, like, teach me, like, what do you want me to do? I was like, girl, just like
I'm here as an author and a storyteller, not as your teacher and, like, life guidance. Yeah, no.
It's also crazy because when I think of my favorite stories and books, they don't hit me over the head with anything. It's kind of like they sit with you, and, you know, it's almost like you moved your furniture 6 inches to the right, and suddenly you're like, whoa, like, the room, like, looks different a little bit. And that's kind of the slow burn that I like.
Yeah, and I loved how in an interview, I think you said you wanted to leave people with more questions than answers, and I love that from a book. Like, I love when I'm sitting, like, literally upon finishing the book an hour ago, I'm just sitting here, like, with so many questions, and that's, like, I think the best thing a book can do for someone is to leave you with more questions.
I agree. Just, like, when a book can really show the boundaries that, like, someone is living in. If someone can walk away saying, like, okay, why doesn't this woman have health insurance? Or, like, where's Peter in this child care situation? All of these things are great. Yeah.
It's so true. And were any of the characters based on, like, personal experiences you've had or people that you knew in your life? Or where did you pull the inspiration from those characters from?
I would say that the biggest inspiration was just the feeling of working in somebody else's house, because that was my life for about 6 years. So I babysat. I was a nanny for one family for 4 years, and then for 2 after that, I was bouncing around to sometimes, like, 8 families a week. And then I was working at a birthday party studio on 92nd and Lex, the craft studio. They're great. When I was doing, like, 6 birthday parties a week, so it was just a lot of children.
A lot of Piper children.
Yeah, I drew a lot from the children. I didn't realize, like, I don't have children now. I didn't realize how serious, like, a 3-year-old can be. Like, still enjoy fun, but just, like, very serious. And I wanted to exercise that in Briar for sure. And I definitely watched a lot of conversations happen. And I'm very fascinated by class and money, and seeing how people shape language so that it doesn't look like they're talking about money was something I definitely witnessed a lot, you know, from, you know, oh, she, you know, she goes to a good school, or that's a sketchy restaurant, and I was just like, you're okay.
I know the way that people try to get around really talking about, like, or saying what they're actually trying to say. Right. I think you did such a good job depicting that too. Like, especially I had no idea you had a background in babysitting, but your depiction of Briar and of every kid in that story, I'm like, it's hard, I think, when you're writing to write the language of a 3-year-old.
Yes, kids are hard.
That was such a great part of it for me, because I really could imagine a 3-year-old being like that. It wasn't just like baby talk all the time. Like she was saying really important and articulate things.
Right. Kids are hard, and that I think, well, I'm obsessed with like the perfect humor from like that person who's deploying that intelligence. And when I interview people a lot for my fiction, and when I was interviewing a lot of moms about their kids, about their day and routine, I would always ask, like, what's the funniest thing your kid has said in the past while? And some of the things are really funny, but most of them were like, oh, my kid says, you know, mommy, I hate our president. And it's just like, okay, well, you I don't
like, where could she have gotten that from?
Right, exactly. And so I think like a child's humor is the best when it's their vision of the world and like the humor that they come up with, rather than you just like giving them adult words.
Yeah, because they do tend to like repeat a lot of things back, but I felt like Briar had like a very clear sense of her own humor, which I thought was like very lovable and made it seem so real.
I'm curious if you babysat as well.
I actually did. It was my first job. I would babysit, kind of like I was really young, so I would like babysit and watch the kids while the parents were doing other things in the house. And I loved it. And I also felt like there's no one more honest than a 3-year-old, whether you like it or not. So I learned so much about just patience, and also I have such an appreciation now for kids who just, they don't have a filter.
Oh yeah.
And then I'm like, why do we have to be all socially, you know, intact all the time when 3-year-olds can just say whatever, and it's really wonderful.
Totally. I do have to say though, what you're saying about babysitting while the parents were there, I've done a fair number of that. And like when I got late into babysitting, I was just like, oh my God, can you leave? Can you leave? So I can be the best babysitter ever if you're not watching me.
I know. It's a different, I think, dynamic when the parents are, because even, you know, if they're doing something else, you can kind of feel them looking over your shoulder. And I'm like, it is your child, so if you would like to come play with your child, you can. But like, I'm totally capable. But yeah, it was always like the moments you get one-on-one with a kid. And I also think the way that their personality might change when their parents aren't around. That, and you showed that really well in the book, of kind of like when Briar was alone with Amira and how much fun they would have, and then kind of how her personality would change when her whole family was together.
Yeah, Briar's got a lot of stuff going on. And I think that like, you know, she is 3, but 3-year-olds have such a human personality. I really do feel that people are who they are from the very beginning. And like, you have a nervous child, you know, Alex has this business about women speaking up and asking questions. And then she goes home and her daughter is doing just that. And she's like, I can't handle this. And so, yeah, Briar has a long way to go, for poor thing.
She's a very smart 3-year-old, though, I will say. I think she was one of the most like complex characters in the story, which was very refreshing to see. But also, I wanted to kind of talk about like the book sort of touches on this tokenism, which is very problematic and also very prevalent. And what are your thoughts kind of on Amira and Kelly's relationship and how it evolves? And also, I think like the voice that her friends are giving her and the voice in her head, and sort of how she navigates that relationship.
Right. The biggest thing was to have Amira dating Kelly as the reader is dating him as well. And there's so much that goes into that. Amira's 25. She's not trying to get married. She's like, this might be a fun night. We'll see what happens. And she keeps kind of trying Kelly out and getting a little bit closer. And sometimes Kelly really nails it. And sometimes he really messes up. And when they go to dinner and he says the N-word while he's quoting somebody else, I think that so many Black women, myself included, have had so many of that instance happen. And it's this moment where you say, okay, well, he's not my boyfriend. I don't want to ruin the night. And I really wanted to rest in that situation. And I think that happens in interracial relationships, but I think it happens in a lot of other situations. To judge their relationship just based on race is really not doing it justice, when Kelly makes a lot more money than her. Kelly lives in a much nicer are so fascinating.
So,
and that doesn't mean that everyone needs to be on this perfect level between each other, but just what they're getting from each other needs to be the same. And so, you know, I have a lot of my characters talking about fetishization and tokenism, even though they don't really know what it means that well. They're just kind of throwing things out. I think the scariest part of racism on this low domestic exist really harmoniously with them using her and feeling good about themselves for helping this girl out, when really what homegirl needs most is health insurance, for sure. So
right, yeah, and that's like the biggest thing. And you know, she's getting like, you know, Alex will buy her all of these things, like, oh, I ordered an extra salad, here you go, you know, and kind of that trying to like trying to really befriend her was a very fascinating part of the book for me, you know, because she's a mom, she grew up very wealthy, hasn't experienced really many of the same things that Amira has, but is also very interested in Amira as a person.
yes, yes. I think it's so important to remember that, you know, I don't think Alex has a hard time communicating with Black people who have the same class solidarity that she has.
Right.
And so with Tamara, they're good. They're in the same class, and like they can, you know, compare notes and talk, and they're good. And Amira has this very natural anti-careerism to her that is almost like threatening Alex and Tamara. And I think situations like that are really interesting, where it's like, we're not comfortable with you being comfortable where you are. We need you to want more.
Yeah.
And for Tamara, that's a big thing in a lot of my, this view of the Black elite saying, you know, you're not just holding yourself back, but you're holding us back too, and we want you to want more. But I personally just don't think that that's Black liberation. Like,
No.
you know, like only being on the top tier. Like,
no, it's like your soul liberation. What makes you feel liberated and free? It's not like you have to shoot as high as everyone else. I think it's interesting, like the sort of race dynamics versus like class dynamics, and how those all kind of come into play in this book, because it's not just solely based around the difference in the races, but also the just, you know, their class and their social background and their jobs and careers and all of that. And I also but it's even prevalent with Amira's friends, because a lot of them are like, you should want more than to be
saw that everyone's the same because you're all living in the same apartment or same dorm, and you're eating at the same places, and like everyone's chill. But then when you get out and you start seeing the opportunities that some of your friends are getting and some of you are not, it gets a little bit dicey. And I don't know how old you are, but there is this period in your 20s where your friends start getting married and you're like, we're spending what? We're doing what? Like, how are we? So all of those things I wanted to throw in there, because I think friendships are really complicated, and getting over things like class issues is not easy. And I think that friendships are run by them more than they're not.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's interesting the way that
Alex, okay, so I think this happens a lot, especially with childcare. A lot of times people hire a nanny or a caretaker, usually a woman of color who needs the money, and they say, how can we make this person have the best experience here? Okay, well, let's make her part of the family. And part of what happens there is you're denying the employee-employer relationship. And that relationship has a lot of boundaries that actually protects your employee. And so, like, I would never, you know, give my husband like a 2 weeks notice. Like, that's crazy. But like, that's what you do for an employee because you have to protect them. And so I think that Alex is dealing with this realization that she holds so much power. Are not ready for it.
Right.
And Alex is like overcompensating in ways that mean nothing. Like, here's a bottle of wine. Who cares?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's where Alex is coming from. And Kelly, I think that he is getting something in addition to being with Amira that she isn't getting from him. I think, you know, he's cute and he has that dad humor and he likes Kendrick Lamar and he's fun. At the same time, when it comes to, you know, like for the first 200 pages.
It's also funny though that it's white women coming up to you and saying that, because like maybe they're seeing some like self-reflecting,
Yeah.
and then they're kind of, yeah. They're like, yeah, she's horrible, but that it seems that she really is trying to make Amira comfortable, maybe not in the ways that Amira needs it. But I think the effort is definitely there, although it does come across as invasive.
She needs some help a little bit, but I mean, one thing she doesn't do, I think that people need to remember, is she does not mess with Amira's money. She is there for her in that way. And like, I can't tell you how many people I babysat for who would be like, oh, sorry, like here's 4 extra kids. You don't mind, right? Here's your like regular $14. See that a guy has dated like the same type of woman, and I think that it behooves of you to look into that past, but also, I don't know, they have a thing together, and so there's a soft spot there.
Yeah, and what do you think are some of the biggest problems or things that you have to navigate in interracial relationships?
I think it's like any other restriction. You're in a group, you are only as strong as your weakest person. Right. And so if you have a partner who's Black and they say, hey, when the police pulls us over, this is how we have to act. You cannot do this. You have to put your keys on the, like, this is what I need you to do for me to feel safe. If that other person isn't meeting you there, then it's just not going to work out.
Yeah, it's a partnership. It has to be equal.
It is a partnership. But I think that we also do that in other areas. Like if I had a friend who like said, I can't drink alcohol anymore, it's bad for me, I'm not gonna like drink with them anymore. I'm like, that's chill, like we don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Like, you have to meet people where they're at, and it takes a lot of listening. And so I think that going in deference of the person who is most at risk is super important. At the same time, you know, there's a huge difference between being in an interracial relationship in New York City where you're at will dictate the care you need to give that person.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you saw Slave Play, but Jeremy O'Hara's is an awesome, it's a great, I mean, if you've seen it, you know, like I don't even have to say how amazing it is. But I just loved this moment that, because it is about interracial relationships, and this moment where there's a husband and wife, and the husband is like, I don't see your color. And the wife is like, you're denying me of my identity by saying, I want you to see my color. And I think that's a common misconception that people have of like, but it doesn't matter to me, but it does matter. It's such an important part of someone's identity. So I think to say, oh, I don't see your color is like a complete denial of that person's experiences.
Right. It actually, that's funny because it kind of goes back to what you were saying about children having the filter. It's like, they see my color and they don't have like, there's nothing wrong with seeing people's differences, and you saying that is like denying who I am. And I think every Black woman has had a time where someone says, oh, sorry, like I forget that you, and it's just like, I don't want you to forget.
No.
This is who I am. Like everything I am comes with it. And so I think, you know, pushing it aside and just saying like, I don't care is kind of defeating the purpose. It's kind of like, how do you want me to care about you?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And I also, and we talked about this before, but the way you depicted the friendships in the relationship, especially Amira's friend group, I thought you did it in a very like millennial and realistic way. What were you kind of trying to get across in crafting these relationships? So I felt like her friend group played a really big role in the book.
Yeah. With this book, I was super interested. I love playing with stereotypes, and this book is filled with them. And so the friend groups mirror each other a little bit. So you have like the momish friend, and then you have the like kind of tell it like it is friend, and then I wanted to play with the tropes of the sassy Black friend and the magical Negro friend with Tamara and Zara. And so I wanted these friendships to be so real, and I wanted it to be very clear why they gravitated towards each other, but I also wanted them to be authentic and like, these are friends that are so loyal but give really like terrible advice sometimes, and they're trying, but they have, you know,
but they're also like 25, and when girlfriends get together, you're like, just do it, it doesn't matter, you're young. So I think that was like a great way. It's not everything has to be so thought out, and like when you're talking to your girlfriends, you're kind of like, I love that moment even that Alex is having with her mom friends, and they're talking about the most embarrassing things that have ever happened to them.
Yes, that's what it's like. And I wanted it to be so real on the page for that. At the same time, it was really important for me to show how, especially the group of Black women, especially Zara and Amira, how they were in private versus how they were in public. And so you have scenes of like Zara and Amira being like, okay, do you have dental insurance? Okay, what about this? Like scheming and like being so calculated and grown up. And then in public, they're wilding out and getting what they want there too. And I wanted to give them full room to have all of those sides and show that, like, you know, just because these girls are like having fun dancing, whatever, doesn't mean that they're not doing like the adulting thing behind.
Absolutely. I know, just because they're like dancing to Whitney Houston in the halls of a grocery store doesn't mean that they're not worried about health insurance.
Exactly. There's room for all of it.
Yeah, and I think a big part of the book is the fact that Kelly films what happens, and with everything going on in the world right now, like, what are your thoughts on the filming and sharing, and kind of how the media sort of this like bandwagon effect when a video like this does get put on the media?
Oh man, I have so many thoughts. Okay, so on one end, you know, the fact that people can pull out their cell phones as a means of protection, great. I think that racism should be called out 100%, and it breaks my heart that sometimes that's the only protection that Black people have, is pulling out a cell phone.
Like on the other biggest weapon,
it's which is disgusting, but I'm glad it's there. And on the other end, I think that a lot of these videos that we see show a lot of cartoon racism, which is someone, you know, screaming the N-word or not letting someone be a part of a place, which does happen. Obviously, we see it, but I don't think that you can capture on video the more insidious parts of racism. And so sometimes I feel like it's a bit of a distraction. Like, you can't videotape someone not believing a Black woman when she says she's in pain, when it's all the time, and that's killing people every single day. And, you know, you can't videotape someone saying no on like a housing application because of their last name. Like, there's all of these instances of racism that I think are so catastrophic that you can't really capture.
And they happen so commonly too. Or something in the workplace that makes you uncomfortable. And I think why I loved this instance so much is it wasn't the stereotype. It was like a very weird, hard to process moment that Amira had in her life that she knew was clearly racism based, but also she didn't want to share the video, and she didn't want everyone to think, oh, that's the girl that, you know, got called out at a grocery store for babysitting a white child. And it's a very real way because, you know, it's not always this very like obvious situation. And even like you said, you know, people not believing Black women. I just read something about how Black mothers in New York have like the highest death rate because people don't believe their pain.
Right. And so when we focus all of our attention on like this Karen or whatever in this video, I feel like that energy is a bit satisfactory, and it's like these other problems are so much more prevalent. And so I have a heart, I don't know. So yeah, I'm super torn on it. Also, like, I wouldn't trust the internet with a video of me like being really afraid and like,
because once it's theirs, it's theirs, and then they decide, I think, the narrative from that point on. So I can see how someone like Amira would be afraid, because then it's no longer her story to tell.
Right. And this is like when I teach writing workshops, we always do this. There's always got to be a surface want and a deeper want for a character. And for Amira, the surface want is like, I don't want to be on the internet. I don't trust that. And the deeper want is, my parents don't know I'm babysitting. I don't feel like I'm a grown up in this video. Like, I feel like I'm like a before photo, and I want to be a better person before that happens. And I think that's fair.
No, absolutely. And I totally understood why. And I liked that she stood up and she's like, it's not your job to put this video out, it's up to me. So I like that she stood up for herself in that way. And And when the book came out, like I felt like I was doing so much research and it got like so much buzz and praise. Was this the reaction you were expecting from this book?
No. I was like, my friends will read it and that'll be pretty much it and that'll be great. I think every writer is just like, let my book be as successful enough to like let me do it again, because I just want to keep telling stories. And so I was so glad that people really resonated with this story. And like it, like the best part of it is like sometimes when I do readings, I'll have women say to me like, I haven't read a book in 5 years and like this one welcomed me back. And that is like the best. I love accessible, smart writing. And so I'm glad no. So yeah, the simple answer is no. I had no idea this was gonna happen.
But it is true when I was reading it, because I feel like making writing feel very real and conversational is one of the hardest things to do. You know, as much as I love reading philosophy and books like that, sometimes you want a book that's like, yeah, this is happening, this is very real, this is someone's life. And I felt like you did a very good job at making it fun. Also, even though it deals with really heavy topics, there are so many fun moments that kind of give you like a breath of relief amongst everything.
I also feel like as soon as you have a child in there, like if you don't have some like light moments, like you're just not doing child service. And like, you know, I appreciate like the bleakest outlook on race. Like I love like, you know, watching the darkest movies, that's fine too. At the same time, I think the way that we deal with race often is by making a joke. And we feel uncomfortable, and so we want to have that levity in there. And so, you know, being low income and Black doesn't just come with being low income and Black. It's making jokes with your friends. It's like looking up your eye. Like all of those things still have to be in there.
Yeah, no, it's not. I like that it's not like an identity for any of the characters in that book. It's just like a part of them. And then everything that they do and how they live their life, that's what makes them who they are.
Yes, exactly. I just have to say too now, I almost saw a slave play last Christmas. Now I wish I did, because I'm not going to see another play again. And I didn't, and I should have done it. And I'm so jealous.
I wish, and I know that you can read it now at least, but just the way that Jeremy did it. I went and I took my mom and I was like, this is going to be intense, but I really want to experience this with you, and I want to talk, because there's a generational gap and everything, and I just wanted to talk to her about it. And we left the play, like, we both were like, okay, we're not going to sleep. Like, we need to stay up and talk about this, because we have so much to unpack here. And my mom, I remember, like, she was like, you need to tell Jeremy that he needs to have, like, a 3-hour Q&A after.
Yes, we have questions, we need answers.
She's like, because I just have so many questions and I'm rethinking so many things. And I think, like you said, that's what a good piece of work is supposed to do, is leave you with all those questions.
Yes. I just love it. Like when one of my favorite professors in school, Paul Harding, who's wonderful, he won the Pulitzer, he's great. He always talks about how when you are writing, like, yes, your job is to tell a story, but your bigger job is to describe something so accurately that it's like almost haunting. And like those are the moments that really stick with me, when you're like, oh, wait a second, like I say that. And I love when people come up and they're like, you having a girl in your book talk about how mixed race kids are beautiful. Like I realize I do that, and I realize how that's not okay, great. Like I shouldn't, that's true, and like I'm glad you took that from that, but like me just telling you that isn't going to have the same effect as you watching someone say what you say. And I love moments like that. I love feeling called out in a book.
No, it's the best, because then you'll see someone do it and then you're like, that's crazy, and then you'll think more and you're like, I might have done that before, and like I didn't even realize that it sounded like that. And I think that's such an important part of the growth, and how, you know, people are starting to educate themselves more, is by being able to look at those things and acknowledge them, and then you change from there. And that's like the biggest gift we can give, is to adapt and change. And and I think for you to say, like, I guess the goal of this book was to kind of leave people with questions, but what do you think when you were writing it was like the one thing that you really wanted people to take away from the book?
Yeah. I don't mean it to sound really cheesy or trite, but just like, I like when I find a story that like I can't put down, it's like a high. Like it just makes me think differently. And when I watch a play, or when I like see a painting, or someone tells a perfect joke, it's like this different mindset where I completely forget about myself. And so I wanted people to find the story so gripping that they forget about themselves, not just like for that moment, but I really do think that we grow as people more when we're not like focusing on ourselves so much. I just think it's so much healthier to be obsessed with other things. And and just get ourselves out of our brain a little bit. But of course, I mean, as a writer, that's my goal. As a human, I mean, I know what it's like to not have health insurance in your 20s. I know that fear, and I know that I performed differently in my jobs because I was terrified of like cutting myself or falling. And I think like if I can create a book about this character who's also going through that, and people say like, wait a second, that's like, what is this world that we're living in, that like her employment is joined to her health insurance and all of those things. Like, it's funny because people like go off on Alex a bit, and I'm like, think about it though, like, let's say things worked out and Alex is Amira's employer and is in control of her health insurance. Alex is a really mercurial character. What if she has a bad day and she's like, no, you're fired, like, that's it. Then Amira can't go to the doctor for like 6 months, you know? And so I would love for people to, you know, really examine those issues because they're so real. But of course, I hate to say it, but the story is always first.
Yeah. No, I mean, as a writer, I totally get it. But I think you did such a good job of it. And just, yeah, depicting these characters so real. And that's why I love reading so much is, you know, no one should ever sit with themselves for too long, I think. And so I love reading because you can't focus on anything else. You have to focus on the stories, on the characters, on the book. And like, it's just quiet. And in this world, we rarely get that because even you're watching the TV and your phone's blinking and, you know, you're doing other things. So to have this moment when like, and this was really the first book in a while that I was seriously was like, could not put down and so invested in. And yeah, it's like a break. It's a mental break and you get to deal with other people's problems for a while. And that's
totally
like, the best thing ever.
When I get my little screen report at the end of the week, I'm like, oh, that's like me just like scrolling and like thinking about myself. Like, that's gross.
Yeah.
So anything that can pull you away and do it in a way that like just really grips you and makes you think about things differently, that's definitely all the goal. And right now I feel like, you know, the weeks are kind of bending together a little bit.
I don't, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, it's Friday, I have book club. Like the days just blend together.
Absolutely. And so, you know, as long as I can stay in the house and stay healthy, like I'll be fine. But if I can come out of this reading a lot of great work, that'd be amazing.
Absolutely. Because I feel like my screen time has gone up so much.
Mine's terrible. I like compete with a friend. We send it to each other every Sunday. And he's like, I was just making like thirst traps with myself. Like, I need to stop doing this.
I know, because I'm like, what actually did I achieve in those like 6 hours that I was on my phone? Nothing. And at least I can be like, I read a whole book and I got to like learn about other people's personal experiences, and that's way better than, you know. But thank you so much for doing this and
taking so lovely. Thank you so, and I'm so sorry, but your nails are so cute, and I kept looking at them. Let's see them. Oh, they're so cute.
This is called boredom in quarantine.
I feel you. I so feel you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, this was really lovely. Thank you.
It's always so fun for me when I get to like talk to the actual author of it, because I think it's such a gift, and I wish everyone could kind of have that privilege. So truly,
I so appreciate that. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Have a good one. Thank you.
You too. Bye. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. She is wonderful and so smart. And I know I only gave you 2 days notice, so if you haven't read the book yet, I tried not to give too much away within this conversation so that you guys can read it. And it deals with so many important topics. It definitely makes you think about a lot of things differently. So I highly recommend it. You should order it. I can put a link on my story to order it. And next week, I promise I'll give more notice. I'm so sorry. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Friday.